Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the confusing life of now tropical storm Isaias. Yes, it is no longer a hurricane at this moment in time. It is currently a 70 mile per hour tropical storm moving off the coast of the Bahamas right now, northwest at 10 miles per hour. If you remember last night, I was talking about how Isaias was sort of trying to get its act together, right? It looked like it was trying to strengthen and form an eye wall and, all the things that hurricanes typically do. And it was doing that. Last night, it was growing into an 85 mile per hour hurricane. And it was getting better organized. And then this thing called wind shear and dry air happened and absolutely obliterated the entire storm. It is quite frankly the ugliest hurricane I have ever seen. You see this big mass of clouds on the screen here, right? Remember how I told you yesterday, you would think the center of the hurricane is here, where all these upper level swirls of clouds are. The center of the hurricane is right here. They're not supposed to look like that. That low level structure of the hurricane should never be exposed. You want to have that low level circulation coupled with a high level circulation in order for it to maintain strength. Now, this is great for us, right? It leads to a weaker storm. And quite frankly, I have no idea how this system still has 70 mile per hour winds. It's a bewildering fact because this system has quite literally been torn apart. There is such little actual convective, meaning storm buildup over the main body of the hurricane that I have no idea where these winds are being packed. I think the hurricane hunters went through earlier, it only found in the main core of the hurricane 45 mile per hour winds, which is barely tropical storm. Most of the stronger winds are out somewhere over here. And actually, I say it's being torn apart. It does look like it's trying. You see this buildup of clouds right in here. Wait for it to come back. There it is, right there. You see that big burst of clouds coming up. It might be trying to get its act together again. Now, I know I kind of said that yesterday and jinxed the entire system into completely falling apart. But the National Hurricane Center does expect it to re-strengthen into a hurricane before it moves equal in and around the Miami area. They're expected to move back up to 75 mile per hour hurricane, which is just barely category 1 strength. It's 1 mile per hour over what you need to have to be a category 1. I don't see it getting much higher than that. It seems like the cap on this thing has been 85 miles per hour for its entire lifespan. The environment that it's in the upper levels of the atmosphere is just too dry. There's too much wind shear in the way of from the southwest that is just absolutely pulling the storm apart. And unless it can really, find some sort of soft spot in there, it's not going to intensify much more beyond that. Now, currently, Isaias, like I said, is moving to the northwest. And if you remember yesterday, I was talking about how there is a shift to the west in the track, right? This morning and throughout the afternoon, there was a shift back to the east, right? 2 days ago, it shifted to the east. Yesterday, shifted to the west. Today, shifted to the east. Well, guess what? It's shifting back to the west again, folks. Welcome to meteorology, where everything and nothing makes sense. Obviously, that's a joke. We do understand why. A weaker system like this, it's definitely fallen apart more than the models initially thought. And the high pressure that I talked about yesterday out over Bermuda has more of an impact on weaker systems than stronger systems, right? The models wanted to make it stronger again, which would have allowed for the storm to act more on its own and less under the influence of the high. But now that it's a weaker system, it's more under the influence of that high pressure, which is forcing it more to the west. Excuse me for a second. Now, what does this mean for the Jacksonville area? Well, if I come over to the NHC and pull up the cone, this does reflect a slight shift back to the west. Now, the storm is expected to make landfall somewhere between Cape Canaveral and West Palm Beach. Now, by landfall, it might briefly brush land. It might not make landfall at all, right? The cone is, still wide enough at this point where it could stay over the water, could go over land, it could just brush the land. Both model runs of the GFS and the Euro had sort of this weird, just kind of following the coast kind of path that's usually unusual for hurricanes. Usually once they get to the Jacksonville area, the way the coast curves, they kind of naturally turn away from it, and plus the influence of that high is just sort of should keep it to the west more than usual. I think earlier runs showed a stronger storm, which would allow it to turn earlier, like I mentioned, but now it's just being forced right up against the coast. And hurricanes are much like living, breathing creatures, right? They want to do what's best to keep themselves alive. They're not going to voluntarily go over land unless something forces them to. I've seen hurricanes weave their way in and around islands where it just doesn't make sense. Irma came very close to Cuba a few years ago, only to suddenly stop and wobble off to the northwest. I mean, it was making a beeline for the Cuba coast. It was dropping right towards it and then just stopped and turned away. Hurricanes do not want to go on land. So I do think that unless it really gets under the influence of that high pressure system or it weakens enough to the point, it should not get pushed very far inland. It should stay right along the coast. Now, as you see here, 2 a.m. Monday, it's expected to be around the Daytona area, maybe just north of Cape Canaveral. It should weaken back to a tropical storm by that point if it makes land interaction. If it doesn't, it could still be a hurricane at that point. But if it does brush land, it should weaken rather quickly. Now, you see, by 2 p.m. Monday, it's expected to be just north of Jacksonville and start to make a turn off to the north and east. That's expected. That's been, basically the trend in all these models. That hasn't changed. The question is, where does that turn start? And that'll determine how close it gets to the actual Jacksonville area. If I can jump over to the Euro model real quick and jump back in time, you see it has it right up the Jacksonville coast, right? I mean, it just follows the coast the entire way as a tropical storm. And really, it's hard to really put what exactly is going to happen in exact words, because the issue with some of the models have been they just haven't even started out with the hurricane at the correct strength, even at the initial time. And that's the issue with anything you're modeling, right? If you model anything, it's an imperfect science. Little factors here and here could change a model drastically. Different models have different biases. Like, I would never use a model like, say, one that I use often for severe weather is the HRRR, because it does very well with short-term sort of supercellular and thunderstorm characteristics. However, it struggles a lot with hurricanes. Same with something like the NAM. I know you guys probably aren't up to date on these model terms. I'm sorry I'm throwing these at you, but just to give an example, different models are better at different things. The Euro and the GFS here, which are the two best hurricane models in my opinion, are showing about the same thing. Just a track up the Florida coast right now, maybe slightly inland, might be slightly off the coast, but it should be relatively near the coast at this point. Now, this could change completely in the next 12 to 24 hours, right? Just yesterday, it was showing, making landfall and going like into the coast over Orlando. Earlier today, it was showing it being, 100 miles, 200 miles off the coast. And now it's showing it right on the coast. So this weeble wobble of models and the cone is just, quite frankly, it's rather infuriating if you're a meteorologist, because you don't know exactly what this thing is going to do. And when you're trying to forecast and the models can't even get the strength right, they're all over the place, you just kind of got to say, this is what could happen, and here's everything in the middle of that. Personally, right now, the the Euro looks like it has it, sort of organizing it a little bit better than what it currently is. Because like I said, there's really nothing in and around the center right now except for this plume up to the north. And if I jump over to the microwave imagery, you can see that last night it had that eye wall, and watch it just completely fade away. And all the bright colors are out away from the center of the storm, which is right where my mouse cursor is. All right, you see the eye there? It just falls apart, and then it's just devoid of all color, which means there's not really any intense rain bands within that storm, which is why I'm very surprised that they still found 70-mile-per-hour winds within this system, because I don't know where exactly they're being stored, because I don't see a way from them. Maybe that they're not reaching the ground. That could be the thing, that those winds might not be reaching the ground at the moment, but they're still there aloft in the system. Now, what does this mean for us? Well, I think our storm surge potential definitely comes down. I said about 2 to 4 feet yesterday. The National Hurricane Center is still saying 2 to 4 feet. Me personally, I would lessen that down to 1 to 3 feet. I just think that the system isn't organized quite enough to have the same impact on storm surge. It's not expected to be as strong, so I can decrease that slightly. However, the National Hurricane Center has seen things like this before, so be my guest if you want to take their word for it and compare from 2 to 4. It's not a huge difference, right? It's 1 foot, but in some places that could mean flooding versus no flooding. Now, what does this mean for our local impacts? Well, if you live to the east of I-95, you're probably going to get the greatest impacts, right? You're along the coast. Those winds are going to be less impeded coming into the coast. Most of the rain bands are going to be there. You're going to be closer to the center. You're going to get more of the rain, more of the wind, a little bit more of the tornadic threat. To that point, I don't think the tornadic threat is as high as I thought it was yesterday. The system just doesn't have enough convection around it to really support that. However, with any tropical system that does exist, we are not in the right front quadrant, which is famous for having, the highest tornado potential in hurricanes, but it can still happen with any of these bands coming on shore. They're naturally rotating. You can get quick spin-ups out of them. Now, if you are west of I-95, the farther inland you go, the less your impacts are going to be. Places like Middleburg are surrounded by forest, right? And those trees block most of the wind from really reaching their full potential, which you can see if I come over to the wind forecast here. The brighter the color from the blues and the purples, so the purples are stronger winds, right? If we go forward in time, you see most of that wind stays off the coast, right? That's because the natural friction of the land and the trees slows that wind down. So the farther inland you go, the less you're going to feel that wind. If you're at the coast, though, you're probably still going to feel tropical storm force winds. It is expected to be a 65-mile-per-hour tropical storm by the time it reaches the Jacksonville area. Again, most of those winds will be offshore. This system is extremely asymmetrical to its northeastern side. So if we're going to be on the western side of this storm. So I don't think our impacts overall are going to be that high. Locally, rainfall-wise, 1 to 4 inches. The closer to the coast you go, the higher that number gets. Local spots inland could see that 4. Local spots could see almost nothing, right? Depends on where those rain bands go and how well it organizes. Other than that, guys, I don't have too much more to say on this system other than, again, it's been a confusing one. It's really been a test of having to stay on top of the models with every single run, because something changes every single time. Every single time there's an update, every single time there's a new model run, something is different about this system. And there's something to be said for how well it's held together despite the environmental factors being so skewed against it, right? Like I said, with this satellite imagery, there is no reason for this system to be just 4 miles per hour below category 1 strength. There's no reason for it to, but it is, right? So you have to take it seriously. You cannot underestimate tropical systems. Now, what's the difference between, the tropical storm force winds and the hurricane force winds? Nothing. Yes, they're slightly weaker, but I can tell you from experience being in Oklahoma, 20 to 30 mile per hour sustained winds can still blow you and your car around. I believe they shut the bridges down in Jacksonville at 40 miles per hour. It's possible some places in downtown, depending on how close the system gets, could see that. The Dames Point is probably the most likely to be shut down, in my opinion. The other ones, are a little bit farther inland than the Dames Point, so they might be a little bit safer. However, like I said, those winds, especially at the coast, cannot be discounted, and there probably will still be some power outages due to trees falling over because of that wind. Like I said, guys, we've been to this before. It is going to be either a very low-end Category 1 hurricane with, in all likelihood, most people in the Jacksonville area not even getting that sort of Category 1 winds. Even if it's a tropical storm, I think most of Jacksonville probably gets lower-end tropical storm force winds, because I do think those winds will be contained, again, off the coast. Now, don't underestimate this system, though. We've seen systems bounce back before. Will this one? More than likely not, but it still can, and there's so much uncertainty in the track still that we just can't be certain on anything at this point. Like, again, just make sure. Batteries, water, candles, non-perishable foods, just in case. It's never a bad idea to have a plan in place for the worst case scenario. With that, guys, just stay tuned to the news, stay tuned to the National Hurricane Center, nhc.noaa.gov. That is where I get all my official National Hurricane Center information from. I say that again, nhc.noaa.gov. And NOAA is NOAA. Stay tuned to this page. I'll get updates out as soon as they happen, and I hope everyone has a great evening.